Last year, Pinterest agreed to pay $22.5 million to settle a gender discrimination and retaliation lawsuit from Francoise Brougher, its former chief operating officer.
Last week, you sued Pinterest, saying you were fired for speaking up about discrimination.
Today, I want to talk about Pinterest and how their team's leadership has a little bit of a sketchy history of not paying their female employees or even some of their female co-creators.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe von Handelsblatt Disrupt, dem Podcast über neue Ideen, Disruption und die Macher und Macherinnen der digitalen Welt. Mein Name ist Sebastian Mattes und ich begrüße Sie wie immer sehr herzlich aus unserem Podcast-Studio hier in Düsseldorf. Wir haben hier im Podcast schon öfter darüber gesprochen, wie wenig Frauen es sowohl unter Gründern als auch unter Tech-Investoren und natürlich auch bei internationalen Tech-Giganten wie Google, Facebook oder Amazon gibt. Im Top-Management dieser Firmen sind es oft gerade mal 10%. Und es gibt immer wieder Berichte über Diskriminierungen von Frauen. Wie schlimm, wie subtil und wie offen die sein können, das wollen wir heute mit der ehemaligen Chief Operating Officer von Pinterest besprechen, mit Francoise Brougher, die viele Jahre als Führungskraft im Silicon Valley gearbeitet hat, zum Beispiel bei Google oder Square. Pinterest hat die gebürtige Französin trotz ziemlich großer Erfolge nach 2 Jahren als COO gefeuert. Wie das geschehen konnte, was die angeblichen Gründe dafür waren und wie es nun weitergeht, das bespreche ich gleich mit ihr persönlich.
The systematic gender discrimination is when you look at performance review men versus women, same characteristics, same behavior, the feedback is completely different and attached to the gender. I think that's a very common form of sexism.
Im vergangenen Jahr hat das Handelsblatt die Shift Initiative ins Leben gerufen. Das ist eine Plattform, um über den Erfolgsfaktor Vielfalt zu diskutieren. In dem Kontext habe ich auch mit Francoise Brougher gesprochen. Francoise, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
You had a great career so far, a very long career. You've worked in different leadership roles for some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley, ranging from L'Oreal to Square to Google, and most recently at Pinterest, there as a COO. You doubled revenue to $1.1 billion and had half of Pinterest's staff reporting to you. Then you got fired. What happened?
Yeah, and I published a very lengthy post to explain my story. What happened is, for the first time in my career, that you say span over 25 years in Silicon Valley, I encountered blatant discrimination from my colleague. And when I start fighting back, I got fired.
Right. We will definitely talk about details later, but tell us briefly, how did a young French woman make it up to the top of some of the best known tech names in the world? How did it all start?
You know, I should tell you, it started in Berlin.
Right.
So you probably didn't know
right,
this.
I thought it was Harvard. Okay, so let's start with Berlin.
In 1988, so think about the timing, I actually was doing an internship in Berlin for a consortium of auto manufacturer, and they gave me data to analyze, and I started teaching myself how to program in C languages to actually visualize this data. So I spent 6 months in Berlin doing this when Berlin was still West Berlin. And I really discovered this love for computer and computing, and it didn't fade over time. Mm-hmm. So I ended up, after college, I did a quick, for 3 years in Japan, working for L'Oreal, again, doing computer assisted manufacturing system. I went back to school in the US. I went to Harvard and graduated in 1994. And then started working in consulting first and then in tech. And I have been in tech for the longest time.
Okay, then you went to Google. How did that happen?
So I went first to Schwab. People don't know it. In Europe, it was the first internet brokerage. So they are the people that really revolutionized retail trading online with the internet. And then I went to Google, when Google was only 2,000 people. So it was early 2005. It was still a very small company. It was still doing ad desks. And I went there initially to work on strategy. So I was very lucky because it was a time where Google was growing so fast. And I ended up working on huge projects like the acquisition of YouTube, of DoubleClick, of moving to display ad, of doing many different things, whether it was in product or in organization, working for the founders.
Okay. And when you think back about thinking about your career, which was the most important, maybe personal character trait, or what vision did you have? What did help you to do this career? What were you interested in the most?
Yeah, so I can tell you, I'm someone extremely curious. And since a teenager, I love tech. I talk about how in Berlin I discovered programming, and I love tech, and especially when it's related to consumer and consumer behavior. I think it's fascinating. When I saw my parents, I could video conference from them from California very early on. I think that was magic. So I did love tech. So that was one. The second, I'm very adaptable. I talk about working in Germany, working in Japan, then studying in the US. So I really try to understand and adapt in the culture I'm in. And I think this helped me throughout my career in moving pretty fast through organization.
Okay, I think this is something many people in tech would tell me now. Is there this one thing that brought you up to the top?
I work hard and I was smart. I hate to tell you as bluntly, but, everyone is smart in tech, so that's not really a differentiator. But I spend a lot of time trying to understand problem, and I generally work well with people, which is also very important in tech.
Yeah. And
I was lucky, right time, right place, there is part of luck too.
And for a long time, you probably were the only woman in big teams, right?
Yeah, most of the time, starting in engineering school, we were very few women. When I did my internship in Berlin, I was the only woman. So when I worked in Japan, I was the only woman in the plant at this level. So I'm used to work in environments that are generally male, driven.
Wie für viele andere erfolgreiche Frauen waren Diskriminierung und diese sogenannte gläserne Decke erst überhaupt gar kein Thema für Francoise Brougher. Sie hatte sich der Sache verschrieben, sie hatte unter anderem bei Google und bei Square Erfahrung gesammelt und diese Erfahrung dann auch bei Pinterest eingebracht. Now, let's look back what happened exactly at Pinterest. What was the thing that got you fired?
Yeah, so the thing that got me fired is... in January, so I have been 2 years at Pinterest, experiencing very different form of discrimination. So, for example, I had taken Square public on the New York Stock Exchange, and I did all the work, meet with investors, and I heard about Pinterest. The company is going public, so I helped preparing for. It's a big event in the US. I don't know how it is in Europe, but it's a big milestone for a company. And then at the last minute, even though I was a chief operating officer in charge of all revenue, I'm told you have to stay back home. So imagine if I were a man and I was told, yes, you have a very important role here, but no, you're not going to see the investor, despite the fact I was the only one in the company that had the experience. So that was weird. Then there was discrepancy on my compensation. I did realize my stock option were backdated, and I was the only executive and I was the only female having this type of backdated stock option. And then I went back and I negotiated that, readjusted. But every time I feel another battle to justify the fact I was a female in an executive team and I wanted to be treated as my male peers. And I think that's the first time I felt it so evidently. So it continued like this. And, I was excluding for board meeting, which didn't make sense. I was excluded from strategy. And after 2 years of this, I got a review from one of my peers, which was a CFO, telling me that my only quality was I was a champion of diversity. And this really hurts when you work so hard. As you said, you really multiply the revenue by 2. You are the most engaged executive when you look at survey from the team, and then you only recognize because you're a female. So at this point, I started calling the person directly and telling, hey, just let's discuss. The conversation went very badly. I explained it in my blog post. I think I was never treated this way in my whole career. And I ended up going to see the CEO that told me to go to HR. And 4 weeks later, I'm fired for being non-collaborative.
Was Pinterest just only a very bad place to work? Have you been very unlucky to land there? Or have you been experiencing all these things before in your career?
It was definitely a spike in the term of behavior, because as I said, I was never treated this way. But yes, I always knew I was different. I was different because I'm a female. I'm different because I'm French. So I always felt I was different. In organizations like Google, especially at the start, I know Google now is a big company, has changed, but I recall the first meeting, we were 13 in the room and 9 of us were born outside the United States. So when the minority is the majority, you don't have this problem. You actually feel pretty good. But what has happened in Silicon Valley in the last 15 or 20 years is, at the beginning, engineers really wanted to build product and wanted to change the world. And there was a lot of ambition around this topic. And I feel because this company was so successful, then it attracts different type of people that are more motivated by wealth. And then men and women start to be competing like in any other industry. And for me, I felt, and again, it's just my personal experience, I felt it had gotten worse. And Pinterest was a prime example of a company that really nurtures this boy club.
Dieser Boys Club, so erzählt Francoise Brougher, bestand aus wenigen, aus 2 bis 3 Männern, denen Ben Silberman überhaupt zugehört hat. Das waren Buddies, die nicht mal unbedingt im Vorstand oder im Aufsichtsrat saßen. What I find interesting about your story, I've read that at the beginning, the Pinterest leadership around founder Silberman encouraged you to be outspoken, right? And on the other hand side, later they called you too bossy, too pushy, and everybody knows the story.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when he hired me, he talked to all my former boss. So it was very easy to understand who I am. I will tell you exactly what it is. It's not personal, but I feel it's what I'm hired for. And I guess initially Ben felt it probably was refreshing considering the way he was running the company. But I think at the end of the day, there was so much pressure from the boy club and himself starting not feeling very happy with this. And it was just not accepted.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What else happened then? You said you have been excluded from meetings, from strategy discussions. What else did you learn in this time?
We talk about difference in pay. We talk about excluding from board meeting. The thing that was shocking for me is even after this happened, the board was never super engaged. And it was something different. I'm used to, when I was at Square, we were in all board meeting and the board were extremely engaged with us. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I find interesting at Pinterest. There was very little oversight. Besides the CEO to actually try to address this issue of culture or even strategy.
So let's try to understand what the difference is here between being bullied and sexism.
I think sexism is when your gender gets in the way of the feedback you receive. So, for example, there is research that has been done by this woman, Karen Snyder, that was an executive in tech, that show for executive female, over 75% of the comment are they are too aggressive, not collaborative, where men are often say they are bold, they are courageous, they have opinion. And that's really when I talk about the systematic gender discrimination is when you look at performance review men versus women, same characteristics, same behavior, the feedback is completely different and attached to the gender.
Right.
I think that's a very common form of sexism.
Mm. These issues.
The other form of sexism that you find is Silicon Valley is very big on promotion, calibration, like employees are evaluated every year. And promotion is an important step in anyone's careers. And you often hear that, a man has potential and a woman is judged on achievements. And it's very rare you get in the conversation when someone tells you a woman has potential. That's also a common form of discrimination.
Wenige Monate nachdem Francoise Brougher in einem kurzen Videocall von Ben Silberman dafür gefeuert wurde, dass sie sich nicht gemeinschaftsorientiert genug verhalten habe, schrieb sie im August vergangenen Jahres einen weit beachteten Blogbeitrag über ihre Erfahrung bei Pinterest. These things you mentioned are being discussed now for years, maybe decades. Do you think it's changing now? Because there has been a big discussion also after you published your blog post. Are things changing now, or is it pretty much the same?
There is more awareness for sure.
But is awareness enough?
I want awareness. I think what was different about my story is what I wanted to show when telling my story is sexism can happen at the highest level of an organization. And we always talk about sexism and discrimination often for more junior people. And I think when I tell my story, I had it credibility because I had this huge span of time in Silicon Valley and a fairly successful career. So I think this has changed and a little bit of a wake-up call that at every level it can happen. Since then, I'm aware of many more settlements, more private, that have happened where women are at least getting some compensation for what they experience. But the reality, as I talked before, unless the minority is much more part of the majority, it's not going to happen. So it's a mass game until you have the right number of us at every level of an organization. It's not going to happen. It's math.
Do you see a difference between Silicon Valley or the US and Europe in this whole discussion?
I don't know enough about Europe to be very insightful about it. I think in Europe, I know, for example, in Germany, something I like is you actually have employees on the board. And I'm on the board in France of Sodexo, of a company that we also have personal representation. And I do think it's helped with oversight.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely a point. And when you think back the whole situation, what did you learn and what can you maybe share for other women if they experience things like that they can do, or are there any learnings you can share?
Yeah, look, I chose to make this very public. Even the settlement, I made it a part of the negotiation that we will make them on public and we will do the right things because I want women to know that they are not alone. Because, with behavior like this, it's in the US, we call it phenomenon of gaslighting. People make you feel you are wrong, right? Around you, everything is moving. You are not in this meeting. You do not understand. You're not part of the decision. You cannot do your job well, and you feel very isolated. So one of the things I really wanted to do is tell women, okay, you're not alone. Actually, there is law, especially in California, that help you combat this situation. And don't be silent. I never signed this NDA, and that is granted that I could, but that is very important to be able to tell your story because no one can steal your story from you. And the more of us coming in, the better the ability to change things.
It's so easy to say, and maybe when you have worked in tech for so many years and earned pretty good money, it's much easier to say compared to when you are afraid to lose your job, right?
Agree. Completely agree with you. I think looking up for other women is very important also.
Yeah.
And I agree, when you're a junior person, it's much harder if you have kids that need to go to school and you are the breadwinner. It's also much more difficult. It's a decision, if it had happened earlier in my career, I may not have made.
Yeah. Finally, Pinterest agreed to pay you $20 million and $2.5 million into equality projects. Does that help change attitudes? Does that change anything, or is that just a personal win for you?
I'm hoping it will change, but it will take time. I'm spending some time with this organization, trying to help them. The best thing I can do right now is being a good connector for this organization. And, I still, because I'm unemployed, I still receive a lot of requests. And I'm trying my best to actually just recommend women and minority candidates. These people exist, but sometimes people don't take the effort to really get to know them.
Im Laufe der vergangenen Jahre hatte es einige Diskriminierungsklagen bei Pinterest gegeben. Vor Francoise Brougher waren es zum Beispiel 2 schwarze Frauen, die sich öffentlich gegen Unterbezahlung und Rassendiskriminierung gewehrt hatten. Über 100 Mitarbeiterinnen und Mitarbeiter hatten sich dann öffentlich mit Francoise Brougher solidarisiert und gerade im September hat eine Co-Creatorin Pinterest wegen Ideendiebstahl und Vertragsbruch verklagt. Sie sagt, sie habe maßgeblich bei der Entwicklung der Plattform im Jahr 2008 mitgeholfen und wurde dafür nicht einmal entlohnt. Diskriminierung und Klagen dagegen haben mittlerweile die meisten großen Tech-Firmen erlebt, von Google über Uber bis Microsoft und Facebook. Did that damage your career, the whole thing?
I don't know. It's a good question. For some company, it did, right? There is companies that will not talk to me because of this. I am a troublemaker, whether I want it or not. So I'm sure there are companies that will shy away, but at the same time, there are companies that reach out because of it.
For example, what do they ask for?
Because they want advice not to get into the same trouble. But especially younger company founders, a lot of founders have reached out telling me, hey, I realize I'm working with my 2 or 3 friends. Help me understand what do I need to do that I don't get into the same problem.
Did you ever think you might leave Silicon Valley because of things that happened?
No, I think the world is very global right now. And it's not because you live geographically a place that you leave first your interest in technology. And I'm an optimist. So I still think there is a lot of place where technology can have a big part. And I'm interested in being here and watching it and living it. And also, I think it doesn't matter whether I'm back in Paris, I still have this story with me. It's not that I can leave it back in Silicon Valley in the closet. It's there.
So you were talking a lot about tech and trends and interesting things that happen. And there's a lot more happening than sexism in the Silicon Valley as well. Especially there has been a big discussion in the last couple of years about if the big time of Silicon Valley is over. Is it over, or how does the next chapter look like?
I don't think it's over. Again, you are talking to someone that is always the glass half full. So it has this challenge. I do think there is a ton of talents that are interested in coming here. There is new areas that are very interesting right now around health and diagnosis and research that are phenomenal, that are not just software. There is a whole, I know it has been hyped, but there is a whole idea of sort of robotic or self-driving car. All of this still come out of Silicon Valley, where people invent things. What I'm hoping is Silicon Valley, and it's start expanding in other places, because it's in the US, it's a little bit of an unbalanced country. So I want to see Silicon Valley, opening office all over the US. And some companies do. They start opening in Utah or in Chicago and trying to really spread technology and technology talent. And I think the last year of the pandemic should accelerate things, because Silicon Valley is going to be more a virtual place than it's going to be a physical place. And I actually think it's a good thing.
That's a very interesting point. Let's talk about this Silicon Valley of the future. So today it's very strong in consumer internet, Facebook, Google, Apple. What will be the most important tech fields and maybe also tech companies of the future?
Personally, I feel, as mentioned, health is very, very important. I think we see a lot on cancer research. We saw Grail that was bought by Illumina, that is an early diagnostic research for cancer. Through a blood biopsy, they can very early on find 50 types of cancer. And I think that's very important because we know this type of illness is treatable if diagnosed early. You have a company like 23andMe that look at the genome to help you understand, if you are going to have Alzheimer's when you are older. So very interesting things. And then there is smaller, more niche company that look at diagnostic. With COVID and at-home diagnostic, it's also an area where Silicon Valley invests. But it's not just Silicon Valley. There is a lot of stuff happening in Boston too. So I do think technology and computing power being used to analyze all the human body information and data we have. I think it's the first time it's happening. And I think that's really interesting.
And when you look at who is strong in these fields and also putting billions of money into these fields, it's the big tech companies. Like Apple is treating depression with iPhone data. Amazon is exploring that field. Google as well. I'm wondering, will they dominate this future of Silicon Valley as well? And maybe will they also be able to swallow everything that's happening there right now? Is that something you fear?
That's a dark picture. I'm hoping there will still be innovation. Again, as I said,
because they have enough money, right? They have billions. They could just buy the biggest car manufacturers. They could buy everything. Sure.
So as pharma, if you think the biggest industry after tech is pharmaceutical. So I do think here you have at least two big power. And I think the innovation is when you have cost of computing going down, a startup may be able to do more things that they were able to do even 2 years ago. So I'm hoping there will still be innovation driven by startup. And we see some of them emerging, the one I mentioned before. So yes, there is a risk that Google and Apple find way to capitalize on their ability to treat data and the interconnected world to work on this, but to our pharma and as a research lab. I'm hoping the field is still quite open.
Also, the discussion goes around the concentrating of power on data in very few hands. And this has a lot to do with the health sector as well. So how would you comment on that? And how important is also regulation in that field for the future of innovation?
Yeah, and I'm sure you know this, in Germany, you have probably the toughest privacy law that we don't have in the US. And that's something that, again, my own opinion is not, I believe we need to have better privacy law in the United States. I think the fact that company can track you, whatever you do, is just, I'm not on Facebook. I have an account I haven't touched in 10 years for this reason. But I am on Instagram. I try to post things that are very mundane. Because I think I don't like being tracked, but I am tracked. Even when you think about Google Maps, I remember probably 6 or 7 years ago, I was with my dad. I'm from Marseille in France. And I told him, I have to go there to run an errand. And my dad started explaining me a shortcut to go there. And then I told him, that's a shortcut Google Maps is giving me. And then my dad couldn't believe. And then I explained him that we actually know where you are. We track you. We understand the speed. So we can tell you where there is where you have traffic. My dad was completely appalled by this. and never wanted to have a smartphone because he said, can you accept people know anytime where you are? So,
but that's a very interesting point because you have been part of all of this. Mm-hmm. So how does that feel? Is that something you didn't think about earlier because you have only been fascinated by technology and now you see, well, it's still very useful, but for some it might be a little monster we created or a big monster?
Yeah. And, again, these things are never black and white. There is very good things that Google Maps do. Like I can track my kids. I can know where they are at any point of time. And for me, that was safe when they were growing up. I knew where they were. I know they're at the bakery. I know they are on their bike. So there are utilities that are critical to Google Maps. Not getting traffic is one that I'm willing to share my location for not being stuck in traffic. The key is people want to know. And two, there need to be very clear value that is delivered. And the case of map is very clear there is value. The case of some social media, it's less clear there is value. And I'm a little bit more reserved there on the usage my kid had number of hours on the phone and I don't like them to see on social media. So I try to get it done.
They would definitely comment in a different way to the value of social media, I guess.
Yeah, it's very different, right? So not all tech is bad. There is, you have to, the fact that I have information on my fingertip anytime is so helpful to me.
We are almost running out of time, but I have two last questions. The first is, what is the point when it comes to technology you are most afraid of when you think about the next years?
Like everyone else, I think AI. I think artificial intelligence, people don't pay enough attention. I think there is a huge problem of ethic linked to artificial intelligence that our next generation will have to deal with, and probably sooner than later.
And when will we feel that? What is the point where you see this will be the biggest threat in the next couple of years when it comes to AI?
When AI can make decisions for human based on human data, because AI is human data.
It's already doing it, right?
Yes, it's already doing this. So there is field where it's interesting, like field of radiology, for example, is interesting. But again, these tools are so powerful that in the wrong hands, the fact that people can recognize your, facial recognition in an airport, things like this are a little more scary to me.
And when you think about technology, what is the thing you are most excited of? What technology, for example, will change your life in the next couple of years? Something we all don't think about it yet?
We don't think about it yet. I want to find technology that, and maybe it's very personal, help people really age better. I saw both my parents and my in-laws living a long life, but the end was really hard. And I don't think technology has solved the problem of how to take care or help people that are end of life.
Technologie bleibt also Francoise Broughers Treiber, trotz allem. Aber wie wird es für die Frau weitergehen, die mit ihrer Klage international für so viel Aufmerksamkeit gesorgt hat? Wie sieht ihre Zukunft aus? And you personally, what is your next career step? You're now on the board of Sodexo, a French multinational food service and facilities management company. What will you do in 10 years? Or don't you think so far? Is it only in 3 years?
That is an interesting question. Look,
what's the next step?
I should have told you I'm not a planner. I'm actually very opportunistic, and I think this is what got me there. So right now I spend time helping startup and founders, trying to help them with their go-to-market strategy, understanding they do the right things, they'll be the right organization. So this takes me some time, and it's kind of fun. And I may be taking more board seats. I don't know yet. I don't think so. You can never say never, but I would go back to 80 to 100 hours operating role because I think this time is over.
All right. So we will definitely talk again. Thank you very much for this conversation, Francoise, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Und damit sind wir auch schon wieder am Ende von Handelsblatt Disrupt. Wie immer freue ich mich über Kommentare in der Handelsblatt Disrupt LinkedIn-Gruppe oder senden Sie mir gerne eine Mail. Die Details finden Sie wie immer in den Shownotes. Danke an dieser Stelle auch für die Unterstützung von Johann Lensing und Regina Körner und Migo Fecke von professionalpodcast.com, dem Dienstleister für Strategieberatung und Podcastproduktion. Wir melden uns nächste Woche Freitag wieder. Bis dahin wünsche ich Ihnen eine schöne Woche und interessante digitale, aber natürlich auch analoge Zeiten. Ihr Sebastian Mattes.